Well, I've mentioned this before, that Advent and Christmas are my favorite seasons of the year. And, we have ordinary time, Lent. I don't think many people would say that Lent is their favorite season. Some people like the additional penance, I guess. But we can kind of get lost in ordinary time. And so Advent and Advent and Christmas, they stand out to us. And of course, out in the world, the lights are going up, and the Christmas music is on, and the parties are being planned. But we have to be careful, because Advent is not so much about celebrating how good and how great things are in the current moment. Because if you think about it from a rational point of view, Advent is a season of joyful expectation. And as we lit the first candle, I think the first candle is hope. Right? You don't hope for something if you're in the midst of really great circumstances. If everything is going well and you have everything that you need, there's really nothing to hope for. And so Advent, as the season of hope and joyful expectation, is a reminder to us that we shouldn't stop and get caught up thinking how great everything is. But we think about how great everything will be. And that is because in our world, we see it, there's no avoiding it, there's no ignoring it. There's a lot of darkness, a lot of spiritual darkness, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, a lot of tribulation, as Jesus said in the gospel, that is imminent, that is to be expected. But our eyes of faith, they tell us to keep watch, stay vigilant, because even though things aren't as good as they can be, sometimes we tell ourselves that they are, even though things aren't as good as they can be, we aren't to lose hope, because someday they will be as good as they will ever be. They will be perfected when Jesus Christ comes in glory. And I came across a quote earlier this week by J.R.R. Tolkien. You know him, the author of The Lord of the Rings. I've never read the books myself, I've seen the movies. But he wrote a letter to his son, and this is the quote I'm going to share with you, but this is something that permeates his writings, especially in The Lord of the Rings. And J.R.R. Tolkien was a man who lived amidst two very dark periods of time. World War I, in which he saw many of his contemporaries die, and World War II, which was the time period that he was writing to his son in this letter. And he says, as a Christian, as a Roman Catholic, I don't have any expectation that history will be anything other than a long defeat. I don't have any expectation that human history and Christian history will be anything other than a long defeat. And it sounds kind of pessimistic, it sounds kind of defeatist, but that's not everything that he said. He said, but along the way, you get glimpses of the final victory. So he was a realist, we'll say. And he's looking back into the past of God's people, that they were a lot of times shrouded in difficulty and what seems like defeat. Time and time again, God's people were being persecuted and oppressed and led into exile. And you just think about the early church and how they were persecuted, and how people throughout the centuries were persecuted for their Christian faith. We celebrated a couple of them last week. Blessed Miguel Pro was one of them, one of the Cristeros who was persecuted by the Mexican government. Before him, in the 19th century, were the Vietnamese martyrs who were persecuted by the government in Vietnam. Coming up, it's going to be the feast day of St. Andrew, one of the apostles who was martyred for his faith. So the whole history of Christianity, J.R.R. Tolkien said, was like a long defeat. And you see that in his writing in The Lord of the Rings, if you've seen the movies. It's about this epic battle that's being waged from time immemorial, right, between the forces of Sauron, this dark, evil force, and the forces of Middle-earth, kings of Gondor, and they're waging these battles, and they go back and forth, and no matter how much success the armies of light and goodness have against the kingdom of darkness, there's always this give and take, and there's always this backtracking, and there's always this defeat. And some of the characters lament this, that they're always going to be a part of this long defeat. And J.R.R. Tolkien saw this as a consequence of our original sin, that we're fallen people, and that no matter how much good we can do on our own, we're always going to have this tendency to extinguish the light a little bit. But he never lost hope. He said, even though we are amidst this long defeat that we all go through in life, he says the final victory, we can glimpse it. And that final victory comes from Jesus Christ. Jeremiah, in the first reading today, was expecting that final victory to come. And it was indeed promised to him. And Jeremiah was writing during a time of exile. He and the Jewish people were exiled by the Babylonian people in the 6th century. But God speaks to them in that moment and says, the promise that I made to you is going to be fulfilled. That I'm going to raise up from David somebody who is going to reestablish that kingdom and who is going to lead the people back into justice. Even though you have to endure this long defeat, the final victory will come. Now, Jeremiah and the people, they got a foretaste of it. They didn't experience it definitively. When the Persian Empire took over, they kicked out the Babylonians. The king of Persia, Cyrus, let the Jewish people go back into the Holy Land. And there they were able to restore their temple that had been destroyed by the Babylonians. They could once again worship in justice. They could be with God in communion with him. But the Greeks came along. We heard about them in the prophet Daniel a couple weeks ago. What was his name? Antiochus Epiphanes, this king god, oppressed the people, and then the Roman people. But the final victory came in Jesus Christ. What Jeremiah and all the prophets were longing for, Jesus Christ inaugurated. And although we cannot see him now in bodily form, as you and I can see each other and enjoy each other's presence, we know that he is here with us, giving us glimpses into that victory. And I saw this in my own life over the past couple of months. A priest friend of mine, very close, mentor, who has come here and celebrated a few times. His name's Father Wayne Campbell. He was my pastor at St. Monica in Moraga. He helped me to discern and to enter into the seminary in 2011. Well, a couple of months ago, Father Wayne felt like he was getting sick. He had a fever and aches, and he didn't want to go into the hospital right away because he thought it would pass. But it didn't pass. So he finally went in, and what the doctors discovered was that he had a sore on the bottom of his foot. And he's diabetic, so he couldn't feel it. And so they put him on antibiotics right away, but the sore, the infection, was too far gone. And ultimately, the doctors revealed to him that he had to have part of his leg amputated, which they did a couple of weeks ago. Now, leading up until that time, when I had heard that he had gone into the hospital, there was no contact with him after he had found out what was going on. He went into this spiritual darkness, and he didn't want to talk to anybody. And he didn't want anybody to know about his situation. But gradually, a few people he softened, and he told a couple of people that he had to go through this surgery. And I notified Bishop Barber, who was not being able to get through to him, and all these people. And eventually Father Wayne said, okay, you can notify the priests in the diocese, and you can have them pray for me. And then word just got out to everybody. And when word got out, he began to receive this influx, this just outpouring of love and compassion from the people that he had from his life, that he had ministered with throughout the years, and that he had helped. All these people were sending him text messages and calling him, and even there's a group of Carmelite sisters from Los Angeles They're not contemplatives like we have in our diocese. They're active. So they were able to make him a video where there's like 30 of these nuns in their full habit singing happy birthday to him. So the question is, if Father Wayne hadn't gone through that long defeat, would he have ever experienced that glimpse of the final victory? Probably not. Now, that doesn't mean that we go looking for these difficulties in our life, that we, welcome struggle and suffering. By no means. But when it does happen, we keep our eyes on Jesus Christ, who, in the midst of that darkness, shines for us. And the way that we do that, and the way that we recognize that, and the way that we do that for other people who are suffering as well, is through what St. Paul told us in the second reading. He said, you have to have your heart be strengthened, and you have to abound in love. May your love for one another abound, and may you act accordingly. May you do what Jesus Christ instructed us to do, which is to love one another. Right? Father Wayne experienced that. And in our own community, we had this outpouring of love yesterday when the Pastoral Care Committee had their Mass in Notre Dame Hall, followed by a reception. And the Mass was for the anointing of the sick. So we had some people there who were aged and who needed that prayer. But after the Mass, which was very beautiful, we served some food, and then after the food, we had some entertainment. And the dancing started, and the singing started. And even one gentleman was there pushing the wheelchair of, maybe it was his wife, I'm not sure, onto the dance floor, pushing her around. And I was dancing, and the committee members were dancing. Was anybody there? Yes. And it was incredible. There were some high schoolers there, but they weren't dancing yet. Maybe someday, right? But they were there, and they saw this. They saw the power of love when you put people and their needs ahead of your own. It was this amazing glimpse of the final victory. That even though life is a long defeat, it seems like, you grow old, you lose a leg, you lose maybe your cognitive abilities somewhat, you lose some friends, you lose some family over the years. It's like life just beats you down. But our Lord Jesus Christ is there, and he gives us glimpses of the final victory when we love one another. And so the question for us as we enter into Advent, it's not so much to look towards in the signs in the sky. When is Jesus going to come at the second coming? But it's to recognize he's coming every day into your life, into the life of your friends and your families and even your enemies. He's coming into those moments, and we have to be prepared for them. He says, be vigilant at all times, so that when those moments come, you can act with love. And you and those people who you love can experience that final victory. So as you're preparing your homes, maybe you're putting up the lights, that remind us of the hope that is in store for us. As you're getting ready for maybe a holiday party or two, think also about preparing your heart. Prepare your heart that it may be strengthened, that it may abound in love. And we do that by recognizing that maybe there are some moments in our lives where we have failed to love. That we need to prepare our hearts, just like we line the strings of lights on our houses. We need to infuse ourselves with a little bit more compassion, a little bit more patience, a little bit more kindness, a little bit more mercy and forgiveness. Prepare your heart during Advent to love. No matter what long defeat you're going through, if you do that, you will experience a glimpse of the final victory.